All right, everybody. Today we got Orson Wells. Orson
Hello,
and I
everyone.
just met over the last month or so. Been following him on social media. If you don't know Orson or don't follow him on social media, go look him up, and we'll get some info here a little bit later. But wanted to give Orson an opportunity to just at the start really share kind of a high-level story and give the audience some perspective on Orson's journey through leadership to kind of get us in the mode of this conversation. So Orson, what's going on,
Yeah.
man? How you doing?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate for the invitation as well as just the opportunity to share with your audience. I think it's always a privilege to be a part of someone else's project or program and share with their audience. So I appreciate that. But yeah, just my journey in leadership is, obviously I've held leadership positions in the past in from everything from in church to if you even go back all the way to high school and all those kinds of things, and professionally as well. And one of the things that's leadership always been interesting to me, but it's also kind of what I do in my career, if you will. I work in organizational development. And so the way I describe organizational development is I help leaders build healthy organizations, and a lot of that is leadership development and coaching and training. So so for the last almost 20 years have been working in organizational development and training on training quite a bit, but leadership has always been something that's been big for me and a big interest of mine. So
awesome. Very cool. One thing that's always fascinated me, and I remember kind of a distinct point in my life where I realized I was falling into these leadership roles more and more. And I'm curious, did you feel like there was a point where you chose that leadership was your path, or did it just kind of come to you?
Well, that's kind of funny. I was always interested in leadership. So I grew up as kind of the shy kid, and I wasn't one to volunteer and say, hey, I want to do that. But the coaches, the teachers, everyone always talked about leadership, and I was like, I want to be that, whatever it is. And it's so funny that my career kind of turned into that, although I didn't know it was a career or a career choice or something that you can talk about, and started reading books. So it's not something that I feel like it's kind of that whole conversation: are leaders born or are they made? And I'm more so on, you have some qualities that you could be born with that are natural behavioral traits that you may have that lead you into leadership. But for me, it was really about finding ways that I can help and serve other people. And so I found that a lot when I kind of figured that leaders, you have influence over a lot of people, and in a work setting, it's directing their lives. And so for me, a lot of my earliest roles in leadership that could be kind of considered almost professional was always actually started in church. And a lot of times leading those groups were a lot of people that were volunteers. And so you talk about people that you don't have any necessarily authority over, in the sense of, you write their checks or anything like that, you don't control their jobs, then you really have to have really good leadership skills. And so that's when I really got interested in leadership from the time I was in high school till kind of young adult 20s is when I was kind of forming my ideas and thoughts about leadership.
That's awesome. I completely agree. Leading volunteers is by far the most challenging form of leadership. And if you can get people to follow you, if they have no real incentive other than, you're all part of that same community. That's a powerful thing. Very powerful. I do want to go back to very early in your career.
Okay.
And I'm just fascinated. I'm so curious and wanted to hear, what was your experience like co-writing, producing, directing, and starring as Charles Foster Kane? One of the greatest films ever made.
Yeah, the funny thing is that I've never watched Citizen Kane.
I haven't either.
Yeah, you would think that I would have, given that I have this name, and almost everyone that I come in contact with for the first time mentioned it, and I'm totally used to it. Doesn't bother me at all. Actually, it's a great thing. But Yeah, it's always it's I'm
Were
always
you
fascinated by the story, but I've never watched the movie.
were you named after, or was your name inspired by Citizen Kane?
Yeah, yeah,
In any way?
it was absolutely, it was actually my mom tells a story that she kind of they went back and forth. There's four boys in my family, and we went back and forth, and or they went back and forth. Actually, I wasn't there at the time, but about names. And so I'm the second of four. And I guess when you have the last name Wells or any type of known last name, you go for adding that famous, first name. And
Yeah,
so, and my dad made the final call, I guess, when it was time to sign the birth certificate. And here I am.
that's fantastic, man. Fantastic. Watching your videos lately, you had a really great one about getting your head in the game, and you were referencing some high school football references, I think.
Yeah.
Would you play
Yeah.
any other sports? Do you have a big athletics background, and how did that kind of shape some of your leadership skills? I guess I could say.
Yeah. So it was, that's kind of funny because I played sports all through high school, just a tiny bit in college. So I was I always consider myself kind of an average athlete, a little bit above average maybe. I mean, I'm not gonna brag. I didn't win any awards or anything like that, but I played football and track primarily in high school. And since we're talking about leadership, one of the things was sometimes not being the top athlete on the team. Usually that top athlete, they're like, they're such a leader. They everyone follows them. And, this is just, that's the one to follow, and they go first, they start and all of that. But I began to think about leadership a little bit different by something my track coach had said. I had 1 year of football where I had an injury during the football season. And so going into track, I told my track coach I had pulled a hamstring. And, if you ever pulled a hamstring playing sports, that is injury takes a while. That injury takes a while to heal, and you're not 100%, especially if you're sprinting. Right. And he said something to me. I told him, I don't think I'm going to run this year. I'm not healed yet. And he said, just come out and try. Just come out to practice. I'm not looking for you this year to win any races, but you're a good influence on the rest of the team. And that just always stuck with me because it showed that leadership isn't always about a position or where you're at in the hierarchy. I wasn't that year. I did not win anything. I didn't really have a good season in track that year, but he said, I wanted you there for basically, if I could translate his words, he's basically saying, I want you there for those leadership qualities where leadership is more so about influence and how you influence groups and teams. And it's not so much about title. And I learned, it struck me then, but I really understood it as I got older that, hey, I was a positive influence on the guys around me that, from a leadership standpoint on how, at that time, late teens, it's all about behaving and taking on responsibility and that kind of thing. And, being focused on whatever you're doing. And so, it really kind of began to shape how I thought about leadership, and it translated into professionally to today. So,
yeah, I think that's great. When I was a college athlete, little baseball, Division II, NCAA.
Oh, wow.
Didn't have the stellar career I wanted. I talked a little bit about this in my last episode, but the funniest thing that I left with from my college experience was sports has this like physical component to leadership, and you kind of yell at each other and get on each other, almost like the military. It's a little more an aggressive form of communication in some situations. And I've struggled with that almost in the work world or the professional world, being a little more tactful and being a little more empathetic and kind of having more of those soft skills. How did your HR background kind of help you with any of that? Or, how did HR in general set you up to be in a position like you are today to counsel these executives and help these organizations manage change? And did HR really help you with respect to that?
Well, it's funny because, in my career, I actually work in organizational development. Now, organizational development, it traditionally reports to HR, but I always think of it as a separate function. Well, as a complementary function. And so I didn't do any of the hiring, the firing, all those employee relations kinds of things.
Right.
My primary role was always training, equipping leaders and their teams to make the organization healthy. And so I'd work with dysfunctional teams, dysfunctional leaders on an individual basis and that kind of thing. And then I'll work with someone that was directly HR. But to answer your question, kind of get to your question, when I started my background is actually in education. And then I went back and got a master's degree midway through my career, well after I graduated my undergrad. But what really helped me were the lessons, because part of what I did was a lot of training on those soft skills. And so I learned about emotional intelligence and about how to communicate more effectively, and then how to apply those things in a leadership role. Because like you said, even if you're coming from sports, it's more so, you do as you're told. You're dictated to.
Right.
Whereas the real world, and even the direction, if you see where the most effective leaders are going, is that emotional intelligence component is primarily the biggest skill that you could develop as a leader, is being emotionally intelligent. And so I learned those, not necessarily so within organizational development, partnering with HR, and how that works is HR, it's a lot of it's transactional, but bringing that consultative approach to how do you manage change, how do you get people to change behaviors and those kinds of things, is primarily where a lot of the work that I've done is help to change those things. And how that translates into leadership is then guiding leaders on what do you need to do to be most effective when implementing change, because companies are always changing, things are always changing. Even at now, when we're recording this podcast, we've got a lot of change going on.
A lot of change.
And yeah, it's like unprecedented change.
Definitely.
And how do you navigate that? And a lot of it is not having the answers as much as it's how you communicate and work with people. And so yeah, that background has helped me a lot, and still does to this day. I'm learning all the time, but at the same time, it's given me a lot of good experience to share and help people.
Mm-hmm. Spending most of my career in the corporate world, curious, how do you see organizations failing most often when it comes to managing change? Like, what are the major trends and hiccups you see most often from organizations?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is setting expectations on how things are changing. And that's always sometimes difficult, because if leaders sometimes don't take, that's where having someone on like me on your team is also always good. Not to try to be not self-serving here, but it's always good, because you bring that perspective, because you have an objective view about what's going on. And the biggest thing is not involving others in change. And when I say others, the team members, the people that are in the front lines, involving them when and how things are changing. Because at some point, if you're making a big change within your organization, whether that's an acquisition, whether that's major process and procedure changes, at some point, it's good to involve others outside of just the leadership group. And so that's one of the things that I think is big. But then you go to any employee survey, associate survey, engagement survey, and the number one thing is communication. And not being in, and so sometimes when things are changing, and that could be even in cultural changes, it's different. There's another side to this in the culture, and we could talk about that. But just in change in general, is how you communicate those changes in a way where people see the benefit for them. Because at the end of the day, as a leader, ultimately your goal is, when you're implementing change, is you want people to adopt that change. And so the underlying question in change is always, how can I get people to buy into this change, to adopt this change, and for it to be something that actually lasts for however long it's supposed to last, if it's forever or whatever. So that's the biggest things, is that communication, getting people connected to what the change is.
You see the technology, obviously right now we're Zooming, technology's changing, we're all working remotely. Are there tools that you see organizations using to communicate better across a broad group of people other than email and some of these traditional things?
Yeah, I think, like, like right now we're on Zoom, and having that human connection is always good. But it goes back to, I think, and this is just my opinion right now in the world that we're in, my view on this is that technology is great and it's always there, but it's never going to replace that human connection. And so the more leaders can make those connections, even if it is using technology. So in the situation where we are now, where we're in quarantine, isolating, and all of that, is thinking of ways, how can you make that human connection with other people? And so something like Zoom, how can we have a good one-on-one conversation that's not just about work, not just about the project that we're working on, but I'm checking in with you, we're seeing how things are going, and we're getting business done. I think that's going to be an important skill. And that goes back to what I said before, what a big role emotional intelligence plays in being able to connect with one another. I think you're not, as a leader, you're not going to ever get past that, but it is something that translates into, what our current work environment, what our current work environments are, what our work environments are right now.
Right. So. Right. Do you think with the Internet of Things and all this technological transformation, it seems like skill sets of high-level people in business or corporate, whatever, it seems like their skill sets are maybe changing a little bit. I'm curious your perspective on how technology might be changing some of those training plans for future executives, or changing some of those skill set requirements that organizations are looking for in their leaders.
Yeah, that's a funny one, because when you're face to face, there's less opportunity to lose things in translation.
Right.
Than when you are, whether it's and so when you're not face to face, and even if it's, if it's written, you can always lose things in translation. And so as far as like skill set and training, I think I think it, like, going down the road, even if you look after this, after the pandemic, and we see ourselves in this situation, I think what you're going to see emerging as far as training goes is how to communicate effectively to your team virtually. Now, there are, and because I've done some work with companies that they're, 80% of their workforce is virtual. And so you have a lot of those, especially if you think about technology companies. There's technology companies now that this is not even phasing how they work, because they're used to it. And some of that is cultural. And so if you think of an organization as a culture, so in technology, for a lot of ways, that's something that's kind of ingrained. There are people that work with them understand how to do that. You can have people all over the world. Where you're going to kind of see a little bit more of the struggle and a lot more training needed are those environments where people are together. And so in Houston, oil and gas is big. And if you look in the corporate environments, people are together, collaborating together, working together. That's where you're going to see the need for additional training on how do you connect virtually, and how do you get things done? How do you stay motivated? How do you do those things? So yeah, I can kind of see, and it's not that training is not out there now, but if I'm a leader, I'm going to bone up on my emotional intelligence skills and how to communicate virtually, and how do I keep others motivated and engaged in this part, outside of just saying, here's a deadline and those kinds of things. Did that answer the question?
I totally agree. To building on that, I've seen where, when I've taken the approach of having a face-to-face or a one-on-one sort of conversation in preparation for bringing a group together, or in preparation for having a meeting where I'm seeking a decision, I often find if I've already built those individual relationships and kind of already established that trust with those individuals, you get to that group setting and you can be way more successful and efficient with everybody's time as you move through those changes. It's a lot of legwork, though, for a leader to have to go around and do all that one-on-one.
Yeah, yeah. And there's, I mean, hopefully they're in a setting where they can delegate some of that one-on-one connection and they're dealing with a smaller group as far as how their organization is designed, that they have fewer kind of, small number reporting to them.
Right.
But when you think about it, when you think about, again, trying to reach everyone, I think one of the most, if you kind of break down, I've just been throwing out emotional intelligence there, but is having empathy for the other person. And one of the things the video you're referring to, one of the things I talked about was cognitive empathy, and asking, so Philip, what are you thinking? Asking, how are you thinking? What are you thinking about? And getting your thoughts and ideas about those things, because that engages you in the process. And so when you talk about what skills are needed, it's how do you create engagement virtually versus that face to face. And so I think that's going to be a big challenge for leaders, kind of, if you think about what's leadership look like in the future.
Yeah, I love that. Asking people about their perspective and kind of pulling them out. What regarding culture, curious what failings again you see organizations making culture wise, and what's your perspective on how you build a strong culture as a business owner or leader
Yeah, so that's actually one of, over the last I think about 5 or 6 years, that's been one of my big focuses in the work that I've been doing within organization, is looking at the culture. And the biggest thing is that culture can just happen. It's always going to just happen, whatever. I mean, because if you think about, the culture is what you do repeatedly, and then it becomes part of what you do, how you interact with each other, all those kinds of things. And if you do it without intention, then you're kind of, you end up with a culture that you may or may not want. Now, there are times that culture develops and it's great, it works, but it's always best, especially within an organization, that there's some intention behind it. And so the biggest thing is, for any culture, for any organizations, number one is really looking at what do you want that culture to be, but then also from a leadership standpoint, embodying that culture, being part of that, setting that example. And when you think about where organizations fail, a lot of times it is that sometimes there's not that real good example out there for people to model. There's no one modeling that behavior, or they're compromising the value that they've set. And so if you have a value of, if integrity is something that your company values, and you as a leader violate that, right, and you don't apologize for it, right, then that's a problem. Yeah. That becomes a problem and a big challenge for other people to then say, there's no real good example out there for them to see. And we do what we see,
For sure. I've heard Gary Vee. Do you listen to Gary Vee at all?
I do, actually. Yeah.
He has a perspective on culture where he says you build culture by hiring and firing. And if you hire the wrong person and don't, get rid of them quick enough, or don't take action quick enough, then your culture, it's going to allow your culture to go in the wrong direction. And, if you have a good person that you fire, obviously that's going to take your culture in the wrong direction too. So I thought that was really interesting. And I've seen that in corporate, how just letting certain individuals go in an organization can have an impact on the culture and the emotion of the organization.
And that's a great point, and I would 100% endorse that idea, because you are building your culture when you hire and fire. I mean, because if you keep someone around too long, and they could even be a leader that is violating those values, then all of a sudden now that is infiltrating your culture, and whatever that negative behavior is now accepted. And maybe it's accepted because they're a high performer. They produce results. And so you excuse some of that behavior. They've been deemed vital to that. But then as the leader, as the ultimate leader, you have to ask yourself, what's most important here?
Right.
Our values that we've set before, or the results that this person brings to the table? Right. I would say, if you're asking me, I would say you can find someone else to bring those results. You can train somebody, groom somebody, get 2 people to do that, or whatever it is. But I would err on the side of, like you said, getting, changing that person out and getting the right person in there that embodies what your company really stands up for.
For sure. You've been killing it on social media. I've been watching your videos.
I'm trying, man.
You've been putting out some great content, man. You got the $1 million smile, great attitude. I love it. Was that hard for you? Is that new for you to be doing that? Obviously, we've been connected over the last month, kind of doing that together. Tell me about some of those challenges. Did you have hesitations to start? I know I did. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. So the biggest thing for me is, and I actually put out I think I did a little video on it, or I wrote something and posted it. It was, sometimes it's hard. It's always hard for me to, you putting yourself out there and saying that, like, this is me, like, these are my thoughts and ideas. Even if now let me back up that question. I started speaking in front of people when I was in high school to some degree, very little. And then more so as a young adult I'm more so in the professional realm now, but even then in church. And so speaking in front of a group or in front of a crowd, I taught Bible studies. I did those kinds of things, spoke from the stage. And so that's where I was actually groomed and honed those skills of talking in front of people. And then I started doing corporate training and all of that. So I got comfortable in front of people and even in front of the camera to some degree. I remember my first time when I did, it took me like 90 takes to do like a 5-minute talk on camera because I was looking at this camera and there was nothing.
Yeah,
I was like,
different.
It's completely different. And so that's a challenge, but so for me, and this is a hurdle that, even if you're comfortable in one area doesn't mean you're comfortable in all areas. And also it was for me, it was just a challenge of putting yourself out there in the world and having your thoughts and ideas being shared out there, and it's permanent for the most part. Of course you could delete it, but it's out there,
right?
And that was a challenge for me in the sense of of doing that. And it's one of those things, I don't know if it's imposter syndrome or whatever, but why are people going to believe what I say and what I do? Even if you can go down your resume and justify everything that you're saying and your experience, it's it's that second guessing yourself. And so I'm at the point now to where I'm quite a bit overcoming that, if I will. That's
I totally agree, man. I can relate. I was terrified, to put out some content, especially on LinkedIn, which was really the only place I had that network, my corporate network, and feeling very insecure about it. How has it helped you grow as an individual? Do you think you've grown over these last couple months and it's helped kind of shape some of your perspectives and skills on leadership?
Yeah, I've had a few professional experiences in my life where, and I think we all have this at some point where you do something and you're like, oh, I actually do know what I'm talking about. Kind of going back to that imposter syndrome. And it was one of those experiences for me. I remember when one of the companies that I worked for, they got best place to work. And I was like, and I contributed to that. I didn't do the day-to-day. I coached leaders and trained leaders to help them get to that point. But I was like, I played a role in that. And it made me think I know what I'm doing now. And so it's one of those things like, I have the skill set, I have the knowledge, the experience, and I'm putting it out there. And then when you look back at yourself, it's like, oh, I may actually know what I'm talking about. But I think that's for a lot of people that we're terrified that we don't know what we're going to do, what we're going to put out there is not going to be good enough. And that's one of the big things is that I say, oh, wow, I actually have something to say. And I think a lot of us have something to say. And so that's where I'm like, if you got something to say and something to do, go and do it. Try it. You'll probably surprise yourself.
Yeah, that's great. The metaphor I love, I made a video about this a while back, is what's your 20? And it comes from the military. Drop and give me 20 at any time. You should be ready to drop down and give 20 push-ups. If you're going to be a leader, what's your 20? At any time, are you ready to go share your message on leadership and what you have to share? And it's really helped me kind of frame up that and understand really what I'm all about, right? So curious, do you have any advice for individuals who might be hesitant to do what you've been doing over the last couple months, what we've been doing? And
Hmm.
what would you say to them if they do have some ideas and they're thinking about getting on social media, but they might be a little hesitant or apprehensive to do so?
Yeah. I feel like I was probably the most hesitant of all people, and I don't know. So that number one. So you're in good company.
Uh-oh.
Uh, if you feel a little bit hesitant about it, you're not, or you're not alone in
Right.
that. That would be the number one thing that I would say. But also is just, there's something, and this is kind of not necessarily oversaid, but just try it. Just try. I mean, there's that whole idea of what are they going to say, but then you ask yourself the question, who are they? Who are
Right.
these mysterious they people that are out there that may or may not say something about you? So I think a lot of times we wrap a lot of fear and shame around putting ourselves out there, and it's worth giving it a try, putting yourself out there, taking the challenge, because in most cases the big question is there's absolutely nothing for you to lose in doing that. I mean, and that's given that you're doing something that's moral and ethical and all that kind of good stuff.
Sure. Right. Right. Right.
But for the most part, there's nothing. And then the other thing is, for me, is going back to something that's popular is that we talk about, is that people like you and I always talk about, is what's your why? And that's like almost similar to, is why are you doing that? Why are you even aspiring or thinking about doing something about, and getting back to that? And for me, I'm always thinking about how much can I help someone? I always think that, I'm not a handyman. I can't fix your house. I can't, fix your car or anything. I'm not a doctor that can, help you get better. I can give you some Tylenol or something, but that's about it. But what I can do, I need to do that and share it with people. And one of the best ways to do that is online. So yeah, so that would be the biggest thing that I would tell someone is get back to why you want to do it and let that be your driver. And if you do that, you'll find that you'll have a lot of creative ideas come up with how you deliver your content or whatever your ideas or message is.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, we've covered a ton of topics today, Orson. Is there any other leadership related topic that you see day to day that you're really passionate about that we haven't covered that you want to share with the audience today?
Well, in regard to just leadership, is that I just, and we've kind of, well, actually I just touched on this in that, and is especially in leadership, is that leadership is an opportunity to serve other people. And because I always think of, everyone has families, significant others, communities that they have to, whether, and I'll talk about it like in a corporate setting, that they have to go back and be with and help. How can you help them serve? How can you help them serve those other people? And a lot of time it is leading with a clear direction, treating them with respect and empathy, creating an environment where they want to work, where they want to give their all at work so they can give their all at home. But so leadership is that opportunity to serve and to serve that greater society. And that's what I would say, is that anyone that's either struggling in their leadership role or thinking if they should even try to take on a leadership role is think about how much help and how much they can serve others, because it's a tremendous responsibility. And I always say that also the biggest thing is just be who you are as a leader. I mean, who you are is going to come out, and you're the authority on who you are. And so that's going to be very important in being confident in who you are and being able to serve and help other people. And that's one of the things that drives me. And so you finding your why about why you want to lead, why you want to serve is, I think, important for every individual.
Yeah, I love that mentality, the service mentality. And I know it from the things you've shared with me at your church and your job, your community. Appreciate all you do for leadership, Orson. You're doing some really cool things. Tell everybody what you got going on, what you're doing. Where do we find you? Here's your elevator pitch.
Yeah. My little elevator pitch. So right now, actually, I'm kind of in where you are. Like I had mentioned to you before, I had a podcast out. So, coming up, there are some things that's some great opportunities as far as a new website and podcast. It's actually, you can see some of my old episodes up on iTunes. It's just the Orson Wells Show. And on there, you'll see you'll see just some really motivational things. But some of the new content that's coming out is going to be very similar to what you've been seeing online, going to be a little bit more in depth, because I try to keep some of the social media posts around 5 minutes. I've ventured up into 7. I said, okay, I need to really make this into a podcast where you can kind of share more content and include, in addition to interviews and that kind of thing. So that's going to be coming up probably within the next few weeks or a week or so. But that, as well as a new website as well. And then some other projects that I'll be working on as far as putting some other content out there as far as training and those kinds of some online programs that people could take advantage of. But if you were to look up, you can find me on all social media as theorsonwells.com or Instagram at the Orson Wells. Yeah, that's right. At the Orson Wells. That sounded funny to say. But and so funny thing about that, you asked me about my name. Do you know how difficult it was to get a domain name or Instagram name? Or
Oh, I bet, man. Very popular.
Yeah.
At least the last name is spelled a little bit different, right? I think there's
Someone posted about Orson Welles, the Citizen Kane Orson Welles, and it tagged me on Instagram and said, "You've been tagged in this," and so I'm forever tagged in someone else's post. But beyond that, yeah, you can contact me in those ways. But I'll have some more content coming up right now, so some of that's under construction.
Awesome, man. Well, Orson, thanks for coming on, brother. I appreciate it. Keep doing big things, man. Love your leadership perspective. Wishing you the best. We keep learning from you, and everybody go follow Orson.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to be on your show.